They said his name only in whispers. Not because it was forbidden, but because saying it out loud felt like an invitation. In the underworld, fear had many languages. Some screamed, some begged, but his fear was quiet. No headlines carried his face. No social media rumors confirmed his existence. Yet entire cities moved according to his decisions. He was the kind of mafia boss who didn't need to threaten anyone. People already knew what happened to those who disappointed him. By sunrise, deals were sealed. By midnight, bodies disappeared. And by dawn, the world pretended nothing had happened. This was his empire. An empire not built on loyalty, but on certainty. The certainty that betrayal would always be punished. The certainty that mercy did not exist. The certainty that fear worked better than love ever could. Inside his organization, rules were simple. You obeyed. You survived. You questioned. You vanished. No second chances. No emotional attachments. No weakness. At least, that's what everyone believed. Because from the outside, the empire looked unbreakable. Money flowed like blood through hidden veins, drug routes, arms deals, politicians on payroll, police chiefs who looked away at the right moment. Judges retired early. Journalists changed careers. Rival bosses either bowed or were buried. And at the center of it all sat the man they called the boss. He never raised his voice. Never rushed a decision. Never explained himself. When he entered a room, conversations died, not because he demanded silence, but because silence arrived before he did. His closest lieutenants had served him for years. Some owed him their lives. Some owed him their families. All of them owed him fear. They believed they understood him. But they were wrong. Because empires don't collapse when enemies attack from outside. They collapse when something changes at the top. And that change had already begun. It started small. Almost invisible. A delayed punishment. An execution postponed until further notice. A rival spared when everyone expected blood. At first, no one questioned it. They told themselves the boss had his reasons, he always did. But patterns don't lie. And the pattern was changing. Meetings grew shorter. Orders became selective. The boss listened more than he spoke. And listening in his world was dangerous. One night, alone in his private office, far above the city he controlled, he stared at the lights below him. Thousands of lives moving freely, unaware of who truly owned their safety. For the first time in decades, he felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Something worse. Not about his enemies. Not about his empire. But about himself. Because power had given him everything except peace. And somewhere along the way, the lines he had sworn never to cross had begun to blur. He remembered the oath he made when he first took control. No love. No attachments. No one close enough to be used against him. Yet lately, someone had been. Someone who knew parts of him no one else did. Someone who didn't tremble when he entered the room. Someone who reminded him, dangerously, that he was still human. And humanity was the one weakness his empire could not afford. Back inside the organization, rumors began to move faster than bullets. A senior lieutenant noticed a protected name on a kill list. A courier realized certain messages were being rerouted. A trusted enforcer hesitated, just for a second, before following an order. Tiny cracks, but cracks all the same. The underworld watches weakness the way sharks watch blood. And someone, somewhere inside the empire, had started paying attention. Because fear works only as long as people believe it's absolute. The moment they sense hesitation, they begin to imagine replacement. And replacement always begins with betrayal. As dawn broke, the boss finally made a decision. A private one. A silent one. A decision that would never appear in any record, but would echo through every corner of his empire. He didn't know it yet, but this choice would be remembered as the moment everything began to fall apart. Not because of an enemy. Not because of war. But because even the most feared man in the underworld had finally allowed something into his life that fear could not control. And the empire built on fear was about to discover its most dangerous flaw. Power teaches a man many things. But it never teaches him how to survive what he loves. The boss had spent his entire life learning how to control people. Fear, money, loyalty, silence, he mastered them all. But this was different. She was never supposed to exist in his world. Not in this way. She wasn't part of a deal. Wasn't a trophy. Wasn't a weakness he intended to keep. And that was the problem. Because in the underworld, accidents don't stay small. They grow teeth. She knew things she shouldn't have known. Not secrets written on paper, but truths you learn by being close to a man long enough to see when he lies, and when he doesn't. She had seen him tired. She had seen him silent. She had seen the cost of the crown when no one else was allowed to look. And worst of all, she wasn't afraid of him. That alone made her dangerous. The boss told himself it was temporary. A distraction. A moment of weakness that would pass. But moments become habits. And habits become vulnerabilities. Inside the empire, the effects were already visible. Orders were still being followed, but not with the same certainty. Punishment still happened, but not with the same speed. Fear still ruled, but it had begun to hesitate. And hesitation spreads faster than violence. His closest lieutenants noticed the shift. They didn't understand it, but they felt it. A shipment rerouted without explanation. A rival spared without reason. A safe house reinforced beyond necessity. Everything pointed to one truth no one dared say aloud. The boss was protecting something. And whatever a king protects becomes the first target. Late one night, a senior enforcer approached the boss with a simple question. Carefully chosen words. Respectful tone. Is there anything we should know? The room went silent. The boss didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. His eyes alone were enough. The enforcer lowered his gaze and stepped back. Question withdrawn. Curiosity buried. But curiosity never dies. It only waits. Elsewhere in the city, whispers began to form, quiet, untraceable. A name mentioned once. Then twice. Then not mentioned at all, but understood. Someone inside the organization had seen her. Not clearly. Not enough to act. But enough to know she existed. And enough to know she mattered. The boss sensed it before he was told. He always did. That night, he stood alone again, watching the city from above. Same view. Same power. Different feeling. He realized something then, something terrifying. He wasn't afraid of losing his empire. He was afraid of what he would do to save her. Because saving her meant breaking his own rules. And rules were the only thing holding his empire together. She had warned him once, quietly, almost gently. You can't protect me forever. He had replied without thinking. I don't need forever. Those words echoed now like a curse. The next day, a deal collapsed. Not violently. Silently. A rival faction backed out without explanation. No threats. No negotiations. Just distance. Distance is the first move before betrayal. The boss ordered surveillance tightened. Internal communication monitored. Trust tested. But every move he made to secure her drew more attention to her existence. And attention in his world was lethal. Someone inside the empire made a choice. Not to expose her. Not yet. They watched. They waited. Because the greatest leverage against a powerful man isn't his enemy. It's his attachment. And the love that softened the boss was beginning to harden the hearts around him. That night, the boss received a message. No sender. No threat. Just a location. And a time. He didn't go. Instead, he changed everything. He reassigned guards. Moved her without explanation. Cut off contact without warning. Protection disguised as distance. But distance feels like betrayal when love doesn't understand the rules of survival. She felt it. The sudden cold. The silence. And silence is where doubt grows. Back inside the empire, someone noticed the pattern complete itself. Protection. Secrecy. Panic. Enough to confirm what they already suspected. The boss had a weakness. And weaknesses don't stay secret for long. As dawn approached, the boss sat alone, calculating not territory, not money, not enemies, but consequences. Because now he understood the truth too late. This wasn't just love. It was leverage. And the empire built on fear was about to be tested by something fear could never control. Trust. Betrayal never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with threats or gunfire. It arrives smiling. Inside the empire, loyalty had always been the mask everyone wore. Some wore it out of fear. Some out of habit. Some because they believed in the boss. But belief is fragile. And fear, once cracked, begins to ask questions. The boss felt it before he saw it. A hesitation in responses. A pause before confirmation. Eyes that looked away a second too long. Nothing provable. Nothing punishable. Which made it far more dangerous. He knew someone inside his circle was moving pieces without permission. Not openly. Not recklessly. Carefully. And the most dangerous conspiracies are built slowly, using trust as camouflage. Meetings continued as normal. Deals were approved. Orders were given. But beneath the surface, information was being shaped. Not leaked, but guided. A shipment delayed just long enough to raise suspicion. A rumor planted where it would naturally spread. A rival tipped off, not enough to act, just enough to prepare. Someone was testing the empire's reflexes. And testing the boss. The irony was brutal. The boss couldn't move openly against the traitor without revealing the very weakness they were exploiting. So he watched. And waiting for him was torture. Because every moment of silence allowed betrayal to grow roots. One night, a trusted lieutenant, someone who had stood beside him through wars and funerals, brought troubling news. A minor crew had gone silent. No bodies. No messages. Just absence. Absence meant recruitment or execution. The boss ordered restraint. That single decision confirmed everything the traitor needed to know. The empire was hesitating. Elsewhere, a conversation took place behind closed doors. Low voices. Calm tones. No mention of overthrow. No talk of murder. Just possibility. If the boss is compromised, someone said, the empire must be protected. And protection, in their language, meant replacement. The traitor wasn't driven by greed. Or revenge. They believed they were saving the empire. That's what made them lethal. Back in his private office, the boss reviewed reports alone. Patterns emerged, subtle but undeniable. Someone he trusted had access to everything being disrupted. Someone who knew his rules well enough to bend them invisibly. But the boss hesitated. Because trust, once broken without proof, destroys empires faster than betrayal itself. And then came the message. This time, not anonymous. A familiar number. A simple sentence. You're being watched. No threat. No demand. A warning. The boss understood the meaning instantly. This wasn't a coup yet. It was a test of nerve. Would he act emotionally? Would he expose his fear? Would he make a mistake? The traitor wanted him to overreact. So he did the opposite. He did nothing. And doing nothing allowed the traitor to take the next step. A protected secret was exposed, not fully, not publicly. Just enough. A rival faction learned that the boss was guarding something personal. Something human. And humans are predictable. The boss realized too late that the betrayal wasn't aimed at his empire. It was aimed through it. Every move the traitor made forced him into a choice. Protect the empire, or protect her. And every time he chose her, the empire noticed. Trust inside the organization began to rot. Allies started arming themselves, just in case. Orders were followed, but questioned privately. Fear was still present, but respect was fading. And fading respect invites rebellion. The boss finally confronted the truth he had avoided. The traitor wasn't hiding in the shadows. They were standing beside him. Smiling. Agreeing. Advising. Wearing loyalty like a uniform. That night, he made a decision that shocked even himself. He ordered a test. A false order. A controlled leak. Only one person had access. If the information moved, he would know. As the city slept, the empire held its breath. And somewhere in the darkness, a phone vibrated. The trap had been triggered. The boss closed his eyes, not in relief, but in understanding. Because identifying the traitor was only the beginning. What came next would shatter everything. Not with bullets. Not with war. but with the truth that the Empire's greatest enemy wasn't an outsider. It was someone who believed they were doing the right thing. And as dawn approached, the boss realized something chilling. Betrayal doesn't destroy empires. The response to betrayal does. And whatever he chose next, there would be no turning back. Fear was once his greatest weapon. Now it was turning against him. The boss had confirmed the betrayal, but confirmation brought no peace. Only paranoia. Because knowing who betrayed you is far less terrifying than realizing how long they've been watching you. The Empire still stood. Deals still moved. Money still flowed. But something had changed. Silence had become suspicious. Loyalty had become performance. And every face in the room now carried two expressions. The one they showed him, and the one they wore when he wasn't looking. The boss began to rule differently. Not with certainty. With suspicion. Meetings grew longer, heavier. Questions replaced orders. Eye contact became interrogation. Trusted lieutenants were tested without knowing it. Given incomplete information. Conflicting instructions. Some passed. Some failed. Those who failed were removed, not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. Because fear works best when no one knows where the line is. But each removal sent a message the boss didn't intend. No one was safe. Even loyalty wasn't protection anymore. Inside the organization, survival instincts awakened. Men who had once trusted the system began building exits. Weapons were hidden. Alliances shifted. Fear had stopped pointing outward. It was pointing inward now. The boss felt it in his bones. Every night, sleep came later. Every morning, trust came slower. And somewhere between the hours of darkness and dawn, he understood the truth he had been avoiding. He was no longer ruling the Empire. He was managing his own collapse. Because the more he tightened control, the more fragile everything became. And then came the order. An irreversible one. A name placed on the table. A name no one expected. Someone old. Someone loyal. Someone innocent of the betrayal. A sacrifice. Not because they were guilty, but because fear demanded proof of authority. When the order was carried out, the Empire went silent. Not in obedience. In shock. That was the moment fear crossed a line. Because fear that feels random no longer protects power. It challenges it. The boss stood alone after it was done, staring at his reflection. For the first time, he didn't recognize the man looking back. He had become everything he once controlled. Unpredictable. Cold. Dangerous. And deeply afraid. The love he had tried to protect was now a distant echo. Cut off, isolated, pushed away for her safety. But safety came at a cost. She felt the absence. The silence. The walls closing in. And distance doesn't erase danger, it magnifies it. Back inside the Empire, the traitor watched carefully. They hadn't expected this. They believed the boss would hesitate. That love would weaken him. Instead, fear had hardened him into something worse. Unstable. And unstable kings don't last. The traitor adjusted their plan. If the Empire couldn't be taken cleanly, it would be taken through collapse. One final push. A final truth. The boss sensed it coming. Every instinct screamed that the endgame was near. But instincts are unreliable when fear controls the mind. That night, he walked through his empire like a ghost. Safe houses. Meeting rooms. Hallways filled with men who no longer looked him in the eye. Power surrounded him. Trust did not. He realized something devastating then. Fear had kept him in control for years. But it had also kept him alone. And now, alone was fatal. A message arrived, unexpected, untraceable. Not a threat. A question. How far will you go? He didn't answer. Because he already knew the truth. Too far. The Empire was no longer collapsing from betrayal. It was collapsing from the response to it. And as dawn approached, the boss understood the cruel irony of power. The more he tried to protect his legacy, the more he was destroying it with his own hands. Fear had turned inward. And once fear consumes its master, there is no enemy left to blame. Only consequences waiting in the dark. Every empire believes it will be remembered for its victories. Few realize they are remembered for their final choice. The boss stood at the edge of everything he had built. Not physically, but mentally. The empire still existed. The money still moved. The streets still whispered his name with caution. Yet beneath the surface, it was already something else. A structure without a soul. A crown without belief. Fear had done its job too well. The men around him obeyed, but obedience without loyalty is only waiting for replacement. And replacements were already being imagined. The boss knew it. He could feel it in the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. Not out of respect, but calculation. Who would survive if he fell? Who would rise? That question haunted every corner of the underworld. He reviewed the past like a man rereading a sentence he wished he could rewrite. The deals. The executions. The betrayals punished, and the innocent ones sacrificed. All justified. All necessary. At least, that's what power had taught him to believe. But power never tells you the truth. It only tells you what keeps it alive. And now, power was asking for one final payment. The traitor was close, closer than ever. Not hiding anymore. Waiting. Because the endgame wasn't about taking the empire. It was about forcing the boss to choose what mattered more. A message arrived through channels long thought secure. No threat. No demand. Just a truth. We both know this doesn't end cleanly. The boss stared at the words, understanding the trap completely. If he protected the empire, he would lose the last piece of humanity he had left. If he protected her, the empire would tear itself apart. Either way, the man he was would not survive the decision. He thought about the myth built around his name. The stories told in prison cells and dark alleys. The boss who never hesitated. The boss who never loved. The boss who ruled without mercy. Legends are easy to maintain, as long as no one sees the cost. He walked through the city one last time, unnoticed. Not as a king. As a man. Every street reminded him of a choice he once made without regret. But regret is patient. It waits. He realized then what no one had ever dared tell him. Empires don't fear enemies. They fear endings. Because endings force the truth into the light. Inside the organization, plans were already in motion. Quiet conversations. Prepared statements. Contingencies. They weren't plotting rebellion. They were preparing succession. And succession begins when faith is gone. The boss returned to the place where it all began. Not the throne, not the office. But the moment he first chose power over everything else. He remembered the vow. No weakness. No attachments. No love. He had broken it. And the price was coming due. A final meeting was arranged. Neutral ground. No weapons, at least none visible. Everyone understood what this meeting meant. Not war. Judgment. The boss arrived alone. That alone spoke louder than any threat. Across the table sat the future of the empire. Men who once followed him without question. Now they studied him like history. Waiting to see if the legend still lived. The air was heavy with unspoken consequences. The traders spoke calmly, respectfully. This isn't personal, they said. It's survival. The boss didn't argue. Because survival had always been his language too. The question was simple now. Would he become the monster the empire needed to continue? Or let the empire burn to protect the one thing fear could never touch? He closed his eyes. Not in defeat. In clarity. Because in that moment he finally understood something power had hidden from him for years. Legacy isn't what you build. It's what you leave behind when you're gone. And whatever choice he made next would echo far longer than his reign ever did. The room waited. The city waited. The underworld held its breath. And just as the decision was about to be spoken, the screen goes dark. No answer. No resolution. Only one truth remains. When fear builds an empire, love decides how it ends.